Well, welcome back to our next edition of Hello World with Mike Cara, as always, proudly broadcasting from Ocoee, Florida, USA, planet Earth. And my next guest is Colm Keegan, a multi-award winning Irish singer. Colm Keegan is best known as one of the principal singers with PBS sensation show Celtic Thunder, and he is a Dubliner born and bred, and Colm may still only be in his 20s, but has already achieved an extensive career to date. And Colm, it's a pleasure and honor you could join me today and tell us, all about your music and all those things we mentioned. First of all, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background and where your love and passion for music comes from?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. And to start off with, Mike, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to be a guest. I suppose my upbringing in music is very similar to a lot of people in Ireland's, which is that the second you're learning how to speak, you're thrown into some sort of musical environment to sing or to learn an instrument. Music is synonymous with Irish culture, and every family really is involved in music some way. But for us, I'm number four of the family's second youngest, four of five boys in the house. So when I was kind of quite young, my older brothers sang in a cathedral choir in Dublin city centre, the Palestrina choir they were called. And I just followed really the family footsteps of the second I learned how to sing. I went into the probation group with the cathedral choir that sang with them for, the until my voice broke. So growing up, music was just part and parcel of what we did as a family. If I'm totally honest, it probably wasn't really until my teenage years really that I started to love it. The sort of the seeds were already sown at that point, and it was when I was coming back to music after the voice broke and I started taking out the guitar, and we were brought up playing the piano as well. And when I started trying to pick out songs on the radio and started trying to pick out songs that I enjoyed, really was when I started enjoying music, and I started going in and performing in front of classmates and getting involved in a few different productions. And yeah, I suppose that's when music was not just something that I did, but something that I love to do.
Oh, okay. So as we mentioned, Colm, about being in this Celtic Thunder, and first of all, my mom and myself love watching that on PBS. And I mean, are you in some of those specials we watch? Are you like on the active roster or reserve roster with them, or?
I certainly am. Yeah. Well, I mean, in recent years, I've taken more of a backseat role due to the fact that my wife, Laura, who was also in the show, she was the cellist in the show for a number of years. And the two of us have two young children now. So we've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So since we became parents, the long tours kind of came to a bit of a standstill, really. But yeah, we've been really lucky to be involved in Celtic Thunder, an amazing show, and some of our closest friends are still those who are part of Celtic Thunder. So regarding the specials, I think my first one that I got involved with was the Mythology show. So that was the first DVD I recorded. When I joined the show, we were still touring the previous DVD Voyage. And then I recorded the Mythology special with Celtic Thunder. I think it was 2012. Some of the listeners probably have a better memory than I do. And then a few years later, there was a Legacy DVD that was shot as well. That was the last DVD that I was a part of. But yeah, in between them, we had the Christmas Symphony album as well, which I know still does well each Christmas. And an amazing few years, really amazing few years. I joined Celtic Woman beforehand. So I suppose what some of the listeners might or might not be aware of is that I finished university and I was on a singing scholarship in University College Dublin. And I was there for 3 years. Was about to finish my undergraduate degree with not really too much of an idea of what I was doing afterwards. I'd already signed up to do a master's in early music, which I know isn't really rock and roll. But that was the plan. I was going to be doing a master's starting that coming August. And I went into my final exam And Celtic Woman, with whom I'd been asked to make a DVD as part of their choir at that point, phoned and said one of their touring members was dropping out. Would I be interested in joining them for a year? So it seemed like an amazing opportunity to do a bit of travelling, to join one of Ireland's biggest production shows. So I took out a gap year, really. I was going to travel the world with Celtic Woman and then come back and do the Masters. And then at the end of that gap year, the brother show of Celtic Woman, Celtic Thunder, came knocking on the door and asked if I was interested in joining as a principal singer. So what started off as a gap year and an amazing opportunity with Celtic Woman became an entire career shift with the way everything worked out. So very lucky. I mean, I've never really, just the way everything has worked out, spent too much time kind of twiddling my thumbs wondering what the next plan was, because things seem to happen naturally very quickly for me. So I'm incredibly lucky that way.
Oh, okay. And you mentioned, Colm, that you actually were performing with Celtic Thunder, with your wife. I mean, how was that experience with the two of you kind of touring together then?
That was great. I mean, talk about living the dream when not only do you get to travel the world and do something you love to do, but you get to do that with your wife, right beside you. Because I know it's a very difficult world to try and have any sort of stability in. It's always extremely difficult for people whenever they've got their husband or wives back home and you're going away on tour for 5 or 6 months. It's a long time of the year, and sometimes social media can be a little bit of a hindrance that way as well, where when the person back home is dropping the kids to school, picking them up, and kind of in the real world, so to speak, and then they go on Facebook and see pictures of nights out or everyone on the beach, and everything always looks amazing on social media. So so it's very difficult, but I was extremely lucky, as I said, to not be in that difficult position of being away from your loved one, but actually being able to travel alongside them. So so an amazing opportunity.
And one thing we see, Colm, in these specials, these Celtic Thunder specials, is not only a lot of singing, but a lot of dancing, choreography. I mean, is that something you had to get used to, is doing some of those other things, or were you already kind of a dancer, sort of?
No, I certainly wasn't. No, I mean, maybe after a few pints of Guinness, I thought I was a good dancer, but I'd never, as had the rest of the guys, never had any dancing experience whatsoever. So sometimes when people see me singing the solo number that I probably get asked and requested most frequently, which is the song Katie that I recorded in the Mythology show, there's a reason that I'm sitting at the piano for that one, and it's probably not just to do with the piano skills, but I think it was any opportunity to take me off the stage and choreography scene. I think they jumped at. So I would like to think, looking back at my time, Mike, without being overly competitive about it, but I would like to think I wasn't the worst dancer on stage, but I certainly wasn't the best. Let's put it that way.
Right. So, I mean, for you in Celtic Thunder, was there, a lot of rehearsals? Were there a lot of practices? Or, I mean, did you just do the one show, or did sometimes you do almost like a dress rehearsal show? Or
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. There was, I mean, a big production show is really, it's quite unusual. It's certainly for me, it was very unusual because I was used to singing, as I said, in a cathedral setting where you would have a huge volume of music that you'd have to get through every single week. You'd be singing at a mass which had in itself 6 or 7 parts to it, and then you'd motets and all these things that every week you were churning out a huge amount of music, which is great in terms of learning how to sight read and learning various music pieces. But when you go to a production and you're on tour for 5 or 6 months, there's a huge amount of work that goes into the opening night. You've got the rehearsals, I suppose that the process starts in trying to decide the set list for that show, and you have meetings with the musical director, with the producer of the show. You start narrowing down hundreds of songs into just a handful of songs that they feel is appropriate for your character, your voice. And then you record that. So you go into the studio, record an album, then you work extremely hard trying to put together the opening night. So it's all kind of new up until opening night. And then if that goes well, which thankfully it always seemed to, it's just a case of just repeating that then for 5 or 6 months. So that in itself is quite unusual. I think it's a very different experience when you're kind of on loop the whole night, and you have to try and find your energy sources really from other means, because when you become so used to the show and you become so it gets to the point where you could almost do it in your sleep because you've done it so many times. You then have to really try and find a way to keep the performances fresh for the audience that in front of you haven't seen it before. So we were really, really lucky and fortunate to have a musical director such as David Monroe with us on tour, and our assistant musical director, Seamus Brett, as well, who both of whom really understood, I think, that difficulty in trying to perform the same thing over and over. So they would always give you targets to try and work towards in a song, and so in your head you were always aiming towards something different in each performance, which might seem mundane, not that important, but it really does keep things fresh for a performer, and subsequently then keeps the performance fresh for an audience that, as I said, might never have heard this or seen it before.
Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, Colm, about this Celtic Thunder, that it is on PBS during their pledge drive. And as you know how pledge drives work, they put the very best stuff, the very, very high quality programs that they feel that will attract people. So that must be a good feeling that Celtic Thunder, is so revered that it's put during these times to show the very best that PBS has to offer, huh?
Oh, of course. I mean, it's a really nice relationship that Celtic Thunder and PBS have, and putting it simply, without PBS, Celtic Thunder would not enjoy the success that it's been so lucky to have over the last few years. So PBS is an amazing organisation. There's nothing really like it back home in Ireland. Whenever I'm trying to explain the idea of PBS to people in Ireland or here in Scotland, there's no real station that is so dedicated to it being a public broadcasting channel and advertising things, promoting things, kind of combining education and entertainment as well a lot of the time. So it's an amazing organisation, PBS. And as you pointed out, I mean, Celtic Thunder have just been so lucky to have that relationship that works really, really well. So even when we're not on tour, we'll still throughout the year be involved in promotional tours, which will be coast to coast. A lot of the time we start off in Seattle, make our way slowly across the country and finish up in New York, or vice versa, of just going around PBS stations, radio stations as well, and just promoting whatever the new DVD or CD and album is, and tour is. And those promotional tours are, you could certainly write a book of some of the things that happen throughout a lot of the way, but it's amazing memories. Really is. It's a very special place, Celtic Thunder.
Okay, Colm. So I want to talk now about these nice songs that our audience has, been listening to, that you sent here. You can tell us a little bit about them. So the first song is Rural Times. Is that it? Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, that's right. So, when choosing songs that mean a lot to you, this one would certainly be that. It's Rural Times is talking about my hometown of Dublin, and it's always been one of these songs that I've loved from a young age, and subsequently I've had the pleasure of them performing it a few times. And this version of it, it's just myself and Seamus Brett, as I mentioned earlier, assistant musical director in Celtic Thunder, who's on the piano, and it just talks about a man who loved his town of Dublin, very neighbourhood friendly, everyone knew each other, and then Dublin over time became this big European capital city, and a lot of the older generation had to unfortunately emigrate to try and continue the work that they were doing. And this is now an older man looking back at his time in Dublin and wishing that he could just play Ring a Ring a Rosie with his friends in the streets. And it's a beautiful song, beautiful sentiment. It's one of these ones that if you're at a sing-song in somebody's house in Ireland, somebody in the family will sing this as their party piece. And, so when you're halfway across the world performing songs, this is one that definitely sort of brings back a lot of memories, keeps a lot of people and the family alive when I sing it. So it's always one that's quite poignant for me and special. So it seemed like an appropriate choice to choose.
Okay, and another song we have here is Beautiful Day. Can you tell us about this one?
Sure, yeah, that's the very first single that I released from my album I'll Never Be Alone, which thankfully, because of the amazing support of the Celtic Thunder fan base, they got the album I'll Never Be Alone to number one on the world iTunes and Billboard charts and Amazon charts as well. So when you're a musician and you're kind of getting used to doing a lot of covers, it's quite a daunting prospect to start writing your own music and putting it out there into the atmosphere and seeing if people enjoy it. And, so for an album to have that much success was really, really overwhelming for me. And the first single from that album that we had was Beautiful Day. And I was, as I mentioned, that I was on tour with my wife Laura with Celtic Thunder, but we kind of formed a duo when we were off tour with Celtic Thunder, and we started performing across the States as a duo as well. And this was, again, before our first tour, I believe. We wrote this song, so it was performed, the first song of our very first solo show together, which is why we released it as our first single as well afterwards. So Beautiful Day is, again, a very special and important song for the two of us.
Okay. And another song we have here, and I think you mentioned it before, Katie. Can you tell us about this one?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a song that probably is the most requested song that I would have, and it's a beautiful song that was written by a well-known Irish singer-songwriter called Jimmy McCarthy, and he was, still is. I should be talking about him in the past tense. He's an amazing songwriter, and the voice of Jimmy McCarthy for a lot of the 80s and 90s was the incomparable Mary Black, who made a lot of his songs massive hits in the charts back in Ireland. So this was next. Katie was one of those songs. It was just one of those songs that everyone was, kind of brought up listening to, and it reminds me of driving around in my mom's car midweek, whether it was to tennis or football or Gaelic and hurling and whatever that was we were going to. It was always this Mary Black tape that we were listening to, and Katie was on that. And then when I joined Celtic Thunder, I was looking for different songs to sing as a solo number, and Dave Monroe, the musical director, said, what about this song Katie? And I hadn't heard it in years at that point, but I was delighted he suggested it. So it's nice to have these sort of personal relationships with the songs from early years then that you get to in later years try and be the one to bring it to an audience that hasn't heard it. And, what an honor to be able to do that.
Okay, so yeah, those are some great songs. And now I want to ask you a question, Colm, that I had, asked another fellow Irishman about music. And basically, if you want to be a Irish, band or an Irish singer in the United States of America, there's basically three songs you need to know, and that is Oh Danny Boy, Wild Rover, and Whiskey in the Jar. So I mean, my question is, are those popular songs in Ireland?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would know anyone that wouldn't know all of the words to all of those songs. That's they're synonymous with Irish culture, and whenever you're stuck for a number on a night out, if you're doing a set or if you're singing at a sing song, well then you can't go too far wrong with any of those three, really. So of course. I mean, a lot of the time when you're putting together a set list, you try and stay away from the more obvious choices, but I mean, they're obvious choices for reasons, because they're great songs and everyone knows them.
Okay, and another question, and this applies both to Scotland and Ireland, that
Yep.
You've been in both. We see in movies and TV shows that, everyone at the pub just breaks out in song. I mean, is that something that really does happen?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. In fact, I think now a few of the Scottish listeners, if they're tuning in, might not like what I'm about to say, but a lot of the time, a lot of my family and friends over here in Scotland would look at the Irish culture and sort of long for the tradition of a sing song, which seems to have died out a little bit in in Scotland, and certainly here in Glasgow. That's not to say you won't find it. You certainly will, and depending on the family, I've been at a number of different sing songs here in Scotland, but it is literally every family in Ireland. That's I think the difference. Any family get together will end up. It's just kind of a natural stage of the night where you'll meet up, you'll have a meal or a few drinks, and then somebody will take out a guitar, somebody will sit at the piano, and the conversation just merges into a sing-song. And even if you don't have a note in your head, you still have a party piece that you'll sing at the sing-song. So it's one of my favourite parts of the Irish culture, without a doubt. And it makes it extra special then when you get to be, for your job, get to travel the world, which is an amazing thing to begin with, but to perform songs that so many people back home will know, and you're kind of keeping that flame lit as part of your career is, what an opportunity, and what a fortunate opportunity to be in. And I think I speak on behalf certainly of Celtic Woman and Celtic Thunder, the two shows I was a part of, that everybody I know that I've worked with is really passionate about Irish culture and Irish music in particular. So to be able to call it a career, to travel the world and perform Irish songs is really special.
And for you, Colm, traveling the world and maybe in the U.S., do people ever shout out requests? Because, here, especially in pubs or bars or wherever, people like to just shout out randomly songs. I mean, do you get that around the world? With, hey, why don't you play Wild Rover?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, requests is something that is it keeps musicians on their toes, So requests are never a bad thing, but also it probably wouldn't be. I mean, we would typically not be performing in a pub setting too frequently now. It's more kind of theaters, larger theaters with Celtic Thunder, smaller theaters as a solo act. So theaters tend to be a bit of a different atmosphere and less sort of less rowdy and throwing out different requests. But that's not to say that they don't happen. And actually, as part of our set, we normally keep a section of the set to ask the audience for requests as well of any songs that they might like. And again, I think what I didn't realize up until I was traveling around America, certainly the people that come to shows that are Celtic, is that you forget that it's such an important part of American culture as well. Certainly to those who are part of the Irish American community specifically. I mean, even if you're not part of that, you can still obviously have a good time at these shows. But for those who are part of the Irish American community, that these songs aren't just songs. They're a narrative of people that had to unfortunately leave a country to go to a different one, and it felt so strong about their own identity that they carried it through their kids, their grandkids, and they would sing these songs. And so when you're singing the likes of Danny Boy, to be as kind of stereotypical as you can, but you're not just singing a song that people associate with being Irish. You're singing somebody's granny's party piece, or granddad's party piece, or uncle's party piece, and there's never going to be an audience anywhere around America, or certainly back in Ireland, that won't think of somebody when they hear these songs. So yeah, you're not just singing a song that people know the words to. You're really kind of tapping into an emotional part of their identity, and that's something that, again, with that comes a huge sense of honor and privilege to be able to do that as a performer.
Okay, Colm. So now I want to talk a little bit about, your social media and website. But first of all, I saw that, I think it was on Facebook, that you are doing like a show, or you're doing like some sort of concert, or
online, is it, Mike?
Yeah, online.
Yeah. So, I mean, like the rest of the music world, really the last 12 months has been a little bit of a shock, So as difficult as it has been with live performances that have come to a bit of a standstill, you kind of have to, at moments like this, clutch at the positives. And the positives at the minute is that we have the technology available that, had this pandemic happened 10, 15 years ago, we certainly would have been in a much more difficult position. But there's a few online platforms that have just been an absolute godsend to musicians in the last 12 months. And one of them is a website called Stageit, so stageit.com. So massive shout out and thank you to all the staff, the amazing staff at Stageit that have been helping artists over the last 12 months promote shows online and trying to bring in a virtual audience. And I never thought that you could replace the buzz that you get from a live audience by singing at a computer, but you actually can. You really can. I mean, seeing all the comments coming through from the audiences around the world and people saying where they're joining from, it's been brilliant. You know, so stages have been terrific, and Laura and I have sort of every 8 to 10 weeks, you know, set up another staged show and performed there over the last 12 months in particular. So yeah, we've been doing that. I had hoped to travel to the States this summer. I had been asked by a few contacts and friends of ours in some of the amazing Irish festivals that happened, and Celtic festivals across the country this time of year, had asked us to join their roster and you know, perform as part of their lineup. Unfortunately, because the embassies are shut, even, you know, we can't even apply for a work visa or renewal. You know, so all of the logistics that go on behind the scenes that people might not be familiar with, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just hopping on a flight tomorrow and heading out. Unfortunately, as much as we would love to. So as much as I'd give an arm and a leg to be able to perform this summer, we might have to stick with a virtual audience just a little bit longer. But having said that, we're also going to be teaming up with a few of those festivals and offering a virtual performance as well. We've got a venue booked back in Dublin for sometime in July, where Laura and I are going to be joined by a top-class band as well in Ireland, and we're going to be recording a set for the festivals that we also might team up and stage it to showcase some of that as well at some stage. So yeah, we're trying our best to stay as active as we can, and to try and stay as in the public light and frame of mind. It's very easy when you're out of sight to go out of mind as well. So we're trying to just keep plowing away while we're doing, throwing stuff out there for anyone who's interested. And also, apart from trying to make a living and continuing to make a living from music, the last 12 months for everyone has been tricky, and it's so unfortunate that the entertainment business has suffered a lot, because this is when the entertainment business needs to be as in the forefront of what's going on, because everyone is down in the dumps. Everyone's at home looking for things to do, looking for things to watch. I mean, I don't know anyone over here that hasn't gone through probably every series on Netflix at this stage in the last year. You know, so this is when people are looking for entertainment. And, you know, Laura and I made a decision at the start of this pandemic as well to not just trying to focus on our music career, but also to try and step up to the mark and entertain people when they need it the most. And that's why even when the pandemic hit last March of 2019, that or 2020 now, you know, that we offered a virtual tour as well. We had a tour scheduled across different Irish centres in the States, and we, instead of just cancelling the tour, we teamed up with them, and each of the centres has their own Facebook pages, and we started doing and broadcasting a virtual tour from our home across the Facebook pages of each of those centres as well. So, yeah, you know, we've really tried our best to just throw things out there to offer people as much entertainment as possible since the pandemic began.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, Colm, about, you know, you mentioned that you do travel to the United States, you know, for shows. And there's a pub, and they will bring in a lot of guests, you know, famous Irish people. And that is in, I think it's Disney Springs. What's the name of that?
It's the Raglan Road, is it?
Yeah. Have you
Raglan
been there?
Road. I have been there, believe it or not. Yeah. Yeah, an amazing owner who's great at bringing Irish people over. So, Raglan Road, yeah, it's been a great venue for some Irish artists in the past. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many. There's such a hub of things that are happening in North America, not just the States. You know, in the Celtic communities, and a huge amount of work that's been done to try and keep Celtic culture alive. And I suppose that's what I try to tap into the most, is not just Celtic music, but Celtic culture. And before touring, I had my qualifications as a teacher as well. So I was a teacher of Irish language and music. So I offer throughout the year as well, I offer lessons in the Irish language and music theory as well. I try and hook up with some of the Irish centres and offer free Irish language workshops as well with what's going on there. So, and then recently as well, I've joined up with Celtic Music Radio here in Glasgow to produce a weekly show on Celtic Music Radio, trying to promote and highlight some of the incredible musicians here in Scotland, back in Ireland as well, and what's going on around the States. So so I mean, staying active and trying to keep a pulse on what's happening in the Celtic world it's ever evolving. So there's a huge amount going on, and it's great. I absolutely love it. I'm very proud to be part of that mix, and I love what I get to do, which is to try and talk to other people who are part of that bubble and try to highlight to the listeners what's going on.
And one thing, I talked to somebody in Scotland, native Scots person, and they mentioned there's Gaelic, but there's also a Scottish language apparently that's not Gaelic. I mean, is that something you've come across?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, the Scots Gaelic is what it's called. So Gaelic, if you're in Ireland, Gaelic would always be known as the sport. So there's Gaelic football. So if you mention Gaelic in Ireland, people would assume you're talking about the sport rather than the language. So the way we would talk about the language in Ireland is either we would refer to it as Irish, or the Irish word for Gaelic is Gaeilge. So you'll hear the Irish language being referred to as either Irish or Gaeilge. And a kind of a sister language of that is in Scotland, which is Scots Gaelic. In fact, just down the road from where we live here in Glasgow is an all Scots Gaelic school, which is, that's the language that they speak as their first language. So, very much alive. Unfortunately, there's less and less people as time goes on that speak the language, and it's part of this endangered language species, as is Irish. But, Irish is still a lot. It's still a huge part of the Irish culture, really, and the fact that it's compulsory that everyone has to learn it in school. There might be less people speaking it on a day-to-day basis, but there's more people learning the Irish language now than there has been in the last century. So it is kind of being kept alive. But Scots Gaelic is not a compulsory language that people have to learn in school. It's only schools such as the one down the road where people speak it as their first language. So you're either fluent in it essentially, or none of it, and there's nothing in between. While at least in Ireland, there might not be as many people fluent in the language as there was in the past, but there's still generation of people in school who are learning it. So it's important. It's such a rich part of our culture that it would be such a shame to see that go. But certainly I would know a lot more about the Irish language scene in Ireland. There's a huge amount being done, and a lot of different government bodies that are in place to try and prevent that from happening. So a huge amount is going on, and certainly around St. Patrick's Day each year. It started off as being the week of St. Patrick's Day, became known as Seachtain na Gaeilge, which is the week of the Irish language, is what that translates as. And there was a huge push to try and get loads of different cultural activities and movies out, short movies out, pop-up places where you can go and speak the language across the country. And that became a 2-week event. So now Seachtain na Gaeilge, which is only the week of Irish language, is now 2 weeks. So it's a very, very long week, essentially. And it's so specifically around St. Patrick's Day, there's a huge amount being done to promote the Irish language, which is great. So hopefully something can be done in the future for Scots Gaelic as well, to try and give that a bit of a much needed push. But yeah, very much alive and part of the community today. And you'll see underneath all the street signs on the streets, you're going to see the name in English and in Scots Gaelic here as well as Irish back home.
Great. So I have a two-part question. So the first
Sure.
part of the question: do you sing songs in the the Irish language? And the second part, if you do, is there anywhere to get those? Because I'd like to hear some of those.
There certainly is. Yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I did my degree in the Irish language, so would have spoken it on a day-to-day basis growing up. When I was doing my degree anyway, and Yeah, I mean, Irish language songs are a great way to spread the word about the language. During my set, I would perform songs like O Rocha the Vat Uwalya, and that is on my EP. So, when you're talking about Rare Old Times earlier, which is from my EP, Raised on Songs and Stories is the name of the EP, and that happens to be the first line of the song. Rare Old Times as well. I felt it was a pretty relevant line for my upbringing, so that's why I chose it as the EP. But on that EP, there is the song O Rocha the Vat Uwalya, and that is obviously, as you can tell, in the Irish language. There's also the famous song, as we spoke about, Raglan Road, the Irish bar in Disneyland, that is named after the famous song and poem Raglan Road, written by Patrick Kavanagh, and that song itself is based on the melody of something that was written a long time before that, which is Fáinne Geal an Lé, and which is an Irish language poem, and that is something that I would sing occasionally during my set as well. And other songs like Magilla Mar that people might know as well would be well-known Irish language songs. So yeah, certainly try and do my best to spread the culture when I'm performing part of the set. And then between the two of us, Mike, as well, what's great about singing in the Irish language, and certainly in the States or anywhere outside of Ireland, is that if you make a mistake in the words, nobody really knows. So you've got that little bit of a luxury as well when you sing Oscailga in Irish. So yeah, I try my best to always, whenever I'm doing a set, I try my best to include at least one song in the Irish.
Okay, Coleman. Yeah, before we go, if people like, to purchase your music and get your music or get the Celtic Thunder, Celtic Women, I mean, can you tell us about all that, how they could get all this stuff?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I suppose that the easiest place to go for all of this is my website, colmkeegan.com. I'm also on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, regularly promoting different things on social media that are happening in my life. So those will probably be the easiest places to go. And then if anyone's interested, if they're hearing me talking about the Irish language or Irish history, Irish culture, and they're interested in online lessons, well, I set up a website a few years ago called ckonlineteaching.com. And, so I offer 7-week terms throughout the year and that as well. So they're the relevant places to go. But musically, all of my material, whether it's with Celtic Woman or Celtic Thunder, or solo material, between my EP, Raising Songs and Stories, and my album, I'll Never Be Alone, can all be purchased or downloaded on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, all the usual music platforms.
Okay. Oh, yeah. And I just forgot, one last question. So being, you've been in Scotland a few years, you grew up in Ireland. And the question is for you, Colm, is it Scottish, Scotch or Irish whiskey?
Do you know, believe it or not, I'm probably not a great advocate for this question, Mike, because I'm not a huge whiskey drinker myself. I've never really, always had a bit of a delicate stomach now. So whiskey is something that could tip you over the edge at times. But that's not to say that I've spent many a night in Scotland with various different friends of mine who have felt it their mission to convince me that Scotch is nicer than Irish whiskey, even though I never claimed the former. So I have been subjected to trialing out a number of different brands of Scotch throughout the last few years of moving over here. So I would typically, I know if my dad in particular is listening, he would ostracize me if I didn't say that Jameson was the whiskey that would stand out. But to me, a whiskey is a whiskey. I would certainly, I wouldn't throw it away, but I wouldn't probably be queuing up to purchase one now, if I'm honest, either.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that Jameson's good. I have a few shots on St. Patrick's Day. So, do you have to drink then Scottish beer then? Is that to get good or?
Yes. Well, no, my drinks of choice would be a Guinness. So that's, I'd be quite true to my culture there. I would, if I was in a pub, I'd be drinking a Guinness. But other than that, I'd be more of a wine drinker. If I'm totally honest, I would enjoy at the weekend a nice glass of red. So that would be my drink of choice really would be a glass of red. But if I was in a pub, I would it would be a pint of Guinness all day.
Oh, great. Oh, there is Irish wines out there then?
No, no, no. This is just, I mean, wines that we buy in Ireland rather than make in Ireland. So, no, it would. I'm open to any culture when it comes to wine, Mike.
Okay, thanks so much, Colm. Any final thoughts or anything else you'd like to mention here?
No, other than the fact that I really appreciate you reaching out, Mike, and having me part of your podcast. I kind of present my own podcast as well, the Create podcast, which I team up with a social enterprise that I helped start here in Glasgow a few years ago called Broad Talent. And Broad Talent started doing a Create podcast, which season 1 was before Christmas. Season 2 will be later on this year as well. So I know that a huge amount of work goes into podcasting, putting it together, trying to find the guests and everything like that. So I really appreciate you asking me to come on board, and best of luck with the venture as well. I hope it all goes well for you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Okay, and if you could give your website one final time, please.
Sure, the website is just my name, so nice and easy. Colm Keegan. That's COLM is Colm. So colmkeegan.com. Simple as.
Okay, my guest has been Colm Keegan, and you've been listening to Hello World with Mike Cara, as always, proudly broadcasting from Macoy, Florida, USA, planet Earth. And please catch us again next time.